Hopefully it's big enough to read. So I know the name's a little odd, Sinomation. I thought this was a term that maybe I had come up with, but I've actually seen other people. Basically, anytime you see the word Sino, it's a reference to China. So anytime there's Sino something, it's actually referring to China something. So I'm talking about Chinese animation. And Chinese animation is kind of a broad term, and it is next year going to be a $72 billion industry in China alone. So this industry has not actually gone outside of China. It's specifically located in China. So the growth possibilities for it is actually amazing. Now, kind of some of this relates to some of the early days of Japanese anime and manga, to where you had this kind of localized industry before it branched out. But the question is Chinese anime, animation, comic books, and so forth, is it actually ever going to be able to move from being Chinese, from inside of the country of China as being a major market player? Will it be able to actually reach outside of China? And even reach outside of China, not just like here in the United States and Europe and in the West, even to reach outside of China into other East Asian markets like Japan or Korea. Now, a little bit about myself. Sorry, I thought this was going to be a little slightly bigger screen. My name is Ryan Carroll. I'm actually from the local region. I'm from just across the border in Missouri from Knoll, but I attended the University of Kansas. I was up in the film department. This picture here is actually me in a film that ended up in Sundance called The Confederate States of America. It used to be on Netflix. It's a faux documentary of what if the South had won the Civil War and we're living today in the Confederate States with slavery. I think you can actually get a bootleg copy of it on YouTube. So if you guys want to see me, I'm in the first 5 minutes of the movie, and it is funny. I ended up receiving an undergraduate research award. I received a grant, and that grant sent me to China. And I ended up staying in China and working in China for 7 years, mostly in Beijing, Shanghai, and I actually spent some time in Hong Kong as well. There, I taught Introduction to Film and American Culture at the National Academy of Chinese Theater Arts, also known as the Beijing Opera Academy. I worked for the Warner Brothers joint venture with the China Film Group at the Beijing Film Studio, and I took Chinese lessons at the Beijing Film Academy. Right now, I've been back in the United States for about 5 years. I consult in the Chinese entertainment sectors, which includes technology, so entertainment tech, and I consult in AGCN, and this is what I'm here to actually talk about right now. Now, I'm just basically, before I get into AGCN, I'm going to put out these two terms, 2D culture and pan entertainment, and what are they? And it's really because to understand AGCN, you also have to understand the terminology that the Chinese use, because instead of using your typical entertainment words that everyone around the world would associate with, that are typically words that would come out of Hollywood, China tends to give their own names and to give their own kind of branding towards them. And it's really just a way to Sinify, to basically make it more Chinese. So what is 2D culture and pan entertainment? Well, first I'm going to talk about the 2D complex of Japan, Nijigen. Basically, if you're followers of anime, you've probably heard words like otaku, and Nijigen is kind of a word similar to otaku. Came out around the same time in the 80s, and it had a very negative connotation. Basically, the 2D complex is referring to people who are so into like anime and manga that they actually have more of a relationship attachment to an anime character, like sleeping with an anime pillow rather than sleeping with an actual girl. Now, the 2D complex, the Nijigen, in Chinese is called Arsuyan. Arsuyan actually does not have a negative connotation to it. It's kind of like otaku. Otaku kind of was referring to dorks and nerds and geeks, but just kind of like geek culture today, otaku has kind of taken on and rebranded itself as being something somewhat cool. And the Chinese have basically taken this exact same word and they basically put it into their own space. So Nijigen in Chinese is Arsuyan, which literally means two-dimensional space. It just R is two, two dimension. So it's basically talking about 2D animation, like 2D animation from like comic books and cartoons. And yuan is just kind of a generalized term for a space, like a courtyard at someone's house or a backyard would be referred to as yuan. But it's also referred to as the two-dimensional economy, and that's because this market, the 2D culture, the ACGN market, in 2005 was $15 billion US dollars, and in 2018 it's $56 billion. And the reason why we've seen such growth, and the growth happens so fast, is because the demographics, the people who are consuming this kind of content in China, is Generation Z. So it's basically people between the ages of 17 and 23 years old. And most of those people are actually closer to the age of 17 than they are 23. And unlike here in the United States, when kids pass that college entrance exam, which was much more complicated than ACT or SAT type of exam, once they pass that and get into college, basically their parents give them money. So the parents are actually giving them money to spend on things like coming to fan conventions or going out to friends and doing karaoke. So which is very different from the United States, where kids typically in college do work. So you're seeing this exponential growth as people go from 17 to 19 years old, and then after they reach the age of 23, they usually enter the job market and they start spending more and more money. And that's why it's occasionally referred to inside the industry over in China as the two-dimensional economy. Now, ACGN was typically referred to, it was originally just referred to as ACG, which just means anime, comics, and games, or Dongmanyo. Dongmanyo basically is just animation, comics, games. It's literally what it means. Now, this type of abbreviation, ACG, is really referring to Japanese anime that has entered into the Chinese market. And the Japanese anime and manga comics basically has propelled this market and created this market. But a lot of people don't tend to use ACG anymore. So, sorry, it was a little joke. I thought I would say, Dongmanyo, I've come to bargain. Doctor Strange, sorry. Kind of an equivalent of ACG would be MAG, M-A-G, which is anime, manga, and games. And this is actually the abbreviation which has been standard over in Japan since about the 1980s. And you kind of wonder, why don't they just use the exact same abbreviation to talk about basically the same type of market, but the market's in China rather than Japan. And the market is actually about Japanese content ranging from anime and manga than it is Chinese content. And the reason why is because of the sinification of 2D culture, the sinification of ACG. Basically, sinification means making it Chinese, the Chineseness of this. And basically, it has to do with the Chinese government, because the Chinese government controls content in ways that we could not imagine here in the United States. Like you have the MPAA, which basically gives your R rating, PG-13, PG rating for movies. Or on TV, they have TVMA and TVPG, and I forget what the other one is. Basically, those are done by a private organization, which is funded by the major studios. So it's basically a form of self-censorship. But over in China, the censorship and the control of content is completely done by the government. And the government over there, instead of referring to the entertainment industries, like games, movies, TV shows, they refer to them as cultural industries. Because basically it's an idea of soft power. It's an idea of taking all of these industries and making them in a way to where they actually project Chinese culture abroad. And this is partially the reason why you don't see a lot of Chinese content actually going outside of China. Recently, the second biggest movie ever is called Wolf Warrior 2. That movie made, how much was it? That movie made almost $800 million. And that $800 million was actually just in the Chinese box office alone. There's only one movie that's made more money in a single box office, and that's Avatar. So you have this idea of soft power. Soft power, an easy way to kind of explain it is like blue jeans, rock and roll music, Hollywood. The United States is the king of soft power. Basically, we can just send out our content. We send out our blue jeans, our rock and roll, our movies, our TV shows, and people consume that. And it's not something that we have done, on purpose. It's not something that we set out to do. It's just something that has occurred naturally. But over in China, the cultural industries set up by the government is to project this soft power. And that's why you have terms like 2D culture, which basically is just referring to anything that is kind of based on like a 2D image, whether it be games, anime series, animation, so forth. But the thing is that it's kind of difficult. As you can see, I've been more or less explaining what this market is. And the thing is that it's becoming more and more common to add an N onto ACG. And the N refers to light novels. And that's also another term taken from Japan. It's basically either serialized fiction or pulp fiction that has some manga elements added to it, whether just on the cover or actually having manga images pasted throughout this kind of written text, which is a shorter novella, which tend to be read more for just its entertainment type of value. But the thing is that it's still confusing, and it is this signification, it is this 2D culture aspect of it, which is continuously changing ACG to ACGN, and really what it is through government intervention is they're pushing out that Japanese anime content. They don't want to have Japanese anime coming in because they don't want Japanese culture to be influencing Chinese culture. And a lot of that still goes back to the Japanese occupation of China back in the 30s and 40s during the Pacific War and World War II. So that A really is referring more to now Chinese anime. The C is not just comics, it's referring more to Manhua Comics. Manhua Comics actually came about in the mid-18th century, and it was actually about 150 years ago that it entered into Japan and became manga. And it was about in the 1980s when manga re-entered back into China, mostly through Hong Kong, and basically revived the Manhua comic. So any comic book material coming out of China is basically going to be Manhua. And then you have games. Games doesn't really change. There's no really like Chinese games. Games are games. And then you have light novels. And this is an aspect of the industry that I think is incredibly overlooked. And it's really due to the freemium-based model, so freemium light novels. So kind of looking at what is the difference between Chinese anime and Chinese animation. Chinese animation is actually more geared towards children. There is a big push by the Chinese government to have more family-friendly types of content, and that does include feature film and TV series. But Chinese anime, like 1,000 Bad Jokes, is much more adult-orientated, and that audience is just kind of like your anime audience. That audience is going to be more geared towards high school, college-age people. But then you're also kind of looking at Chinese animation and Chinese anime. You have a couple of the major movies. In the box office itself, Chinese animation has not been very successful. This film, The Monkey King Hero is Back, is the most successful Chinese animation film ever. And honestly, it's probably the only Chinese animated film that has actually been successful. It made over $100 million at the box office. And another success is Big Fish in Begonia. This was a big passion project, and the animation of this was actually done by Studio Mir. Studio Mir is the animation studio behind The Legend of Korra and Voltron, The Legendary Defenders. So they did this animation, and this animation is actually going to be here in the United States box office in a limited release. So you might be finding it on like Netflix or Hulu probably at the end of the year or early next year. And you can actually find Chinese anime on Netflix. A lot of people probably think that this is a Japanese anime, Flowers of Youth. It's from the same director of Your Name which is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Your Name. Your Name was one of those kind of body swap, where the girl and the boy swap bodies with each other. It was a huge film, made almost $100 million in China. But this film is actually backed by a Chinese animation, Howliner, and the primary team behind this, other than the Japanese director, are all Chinese. But Chinese animation and Chinese anime, is there a lot of overlap? No, there is actually not. Because when you have Chinese animation, you're talking about animation that's geared towards kids. And I'm not talking like kids, I'm talking like little kids. You know, you're talking like Pleasant Goat and Big Big Wolf and Boonie Bears. Now, these are two of the only Chinese animation that actually have made the move from Chinese TV, from a series, to actually having successful films. Now, what makes this market so big is streaming content players. And so you have content platforms, which are not just a content platform. So it's not just like Netflix, but with animated content. It's actually a social media platform with anime content embedded into it. So people are not just watching this anime content, they're actually interacting with it. And a big portion of that is called bullet screens. And bullet screens, actually, so if you're watching the anime series, even if it's a live stream and it's debuting, when people write comments below, those comments will actually go across the screen. And those comments can become so much to where you actually can't even see the animation itself, because there's literally hundreds of people's comments going across the screen at one time. And this is incredibly popular in China, and it's something that came out of Japan, but it sounds really annoying, honestly. I could see if you would go back and rewatch the series, that you would actually like to see what people are saying in real time. But as you're watching the debut of the series live, and you actually have all of these words, all of these contents, it kind of makes it difficult to actually to pay attention, especially if there's subtitles involved. Now, the two major players in this are ActFun and Bilibili. Bilibili is a powerhouse in China. Bilibili, they're also referred to as A-John and B-John, so basically A station, like a subway station, and B station. Now, A station, ActFun was the largest player. It was the first player. And basically, it was a copy off of Nico Nico out of Japan, which is the 8th largest platform in Japan. It's an anime platform. So basically, ActFun, which just basically stands for Anime Comics Fun, was a ripoff of Nico Nico. But because of poor management, one of the viewers of ActFun decided that he was going to create his own version, and he created Bilibili. And Bilibili has just taken off. Bilibili controls 7.5% of the entire streaming content market of China. You're talking about 750 million people streaming content, and 7.5 of that is controlled by one company. And actually, the thing is, ActFun almost disappeared earlier this year. And on Weibo, which is basically the Twitter of China, they posted, "I want to live another 500 years." And basically it was just a plea to their fans to basically get them to subscribe to their site, to put more money into the site, and to create a campaign to get another company to either fund them or purchase them. And the company that ended up purchasing them is Kuaishou. Kuai means fast, show means hand, just fast hand. It's a short format video app, which is incredibly popular. So it's kind of like your little stories on Instagram, but the stories would be limited to like 15 seconds or 30 seconds. Now, the interesting thing is that Bilibili did they listed on the NASDAQ here in the United States earlier this year. They raised almost $500 million here in the U.S. to expand their company. And one of their biggest backers was a company called Tencent. And Tencent is also one of the biggest backers of Kuaishou. So we're going to kind of be getting back to the company Tencent. You're going to be seeing this name again a little later on. And it's right here. So kind of moving on to Manhua Comics. There are two major players in the comic book platform industry. So comic books over in China is you don't actually have a comic book store. So if you're going to be wanting to read a comic book or manga type comic, you're going to be getting onto either an app on your phone, like Kuaikan, or you're going to be getting onto a platform, basically a streaming type of platform. And there are two companies that completely control the comic book market. One of them is Tencent Comics, which is the biggest internet company and gaming company in China, and the other is NetEase. NetEase is the second biggest company in China. And NetEase has done a partnership with Marvel Comics, and earlier this year, they released two official, brand new Marvel superheroes, the Warriors of the Three Sovereigns, which is this guy, Swordmaster, and Cyclone, which is kind of set in a Chinese setting, and she controls the wind. So we have two official Marvel comic characters that are exclusively distributed only in China. And this is something that Marvel has been doing for years. Marvel has gone into markets like Japan and Korea, and they've created characters specifically for that market to basically interact with your staple of Marvel characters like the Hulk and Spider-Man. And it has proven to be a successful model for Marvel. And we even actually have seen some of those characters cross-pollinate back to the United States. There's a character called White Fox from South Korea, who was a character in an animated series that was specifically made for the Korean market. And you had one Korean superhero, and this character was so successful that she actually debuted in an X-Men comic just last year. So she's now officially a part of the Marvel canon here in the United States. But will we see that with the Chinese superheroes? It's really too early to tell. But Tencent Comics has the Fox Spirit Matchmaker, which started off as a very successful comic. It got adapted by Tencent, another division of Tencent, into an incredibly successful anime. And even here in the United States, I know some people have actually been viewing this anime, on bootleg sites. So some people might be familiar with it, but it really hasn't. The Chinese anime content really hasn't entered into the United States market yet, even though it probably will begin to. And most people will probably just associate it with Japanese anime, not really realizing that it's coming from China. Now, games, we just kind of mentioned that NetEase and Tencent are both gaming giants. Tencent is the largest gaming company in the world. If you guys are gamers, most likely you have played games that are either owned or controlled by Tencent. Tencent bought Riot Games, League of Legends, the Player Unknown Battleground, PUBG. Okay, thank you. I never heard it out loud before. That's actually a game owned and controlled by Tencent. And their biggest game is, in English, referred to as Arena of Valor. But in Chinese, it's referred to as Honor of Kings. And it is the largest game in the world. So you think games like League of Legends and Fortnite actually have a lot of people playing. They don't even scratch the surface of how many people were playing Honor of Kings. Honor of Kings, or Arena of Valor, which was launched here earlier, or this year, or last year in the United States. It was launched in 2015. It's made over $2 billion in profits. That's not how much money it's actually generated. This is how much money it's actually made in profits. Honor of Kings has 200 million registered players, and at its height, it had 50 million players playing it every single day. So 50 million people in China were playing Honor of Kings, which is a mobile MOBA game, every single day. It's actually become such a problem that the government has stepped in. Yet again, the government has stepped in, and they've actually been controlling the number of hours. So children under 8 can only play for 1 hour a day. Children between the ages of 12 and 18 can only play for 2 hours, and basically it's unlimited after that. And I just actually came out today in the news that they are doing facial recognition. So when you log on to your game, they're actually going to have you do facial recognition to verify that you are over the age of 18. But also, it's another way for the government to actually control the population. Facial recognition technology is becoming a very, very big thing in China. Police officers are wearing smart glasses during the holiday season, and they're going around in concerts, and they're going around train stations with these smart glasses, and they're basically connected to a database of people who are wanted. or people who are suspected of something. So the facial recognition on gaming like this is probably going to become quite common. And the most interesting thing is that Honor of Kings demographic, its major demographic, is 54% female. And this actually lines up here in the United States. In the United States, the gaming population is about 50-50 male-female. And this is showing that even in China, the female population of gamers is growing, and it's becoming an incredibly important demographic to market towards. And one thing that separates in China, which separates female gamers and male gamers, particularly here on Honor of Kings, is that female gamers actually buy more microtransactions. They actually spend more money in the game than their male counterparts. So this is probably a demographic that's going to start changing the landscape of some Chinese games. And next year at the Bentonville Film Festival, I'm doing a panel, and we're specifically going to be looking at digital disruption and the rise of female geekdom. And it's going to be a cross-cultural examination between China, like here with Honor of Kings, and here in the United States. Because across the board, females actually make up, you go watch any Marvel movies, any superhero movies, Comic-Cons, games, comic books, it's all female. The comic book market here in the United States, the reason why the comic book market has continued to grow and is actually seeing large growth figures over the last 10 years is all due to digital comics, and it's due to female readership. Because basically you've got females who felt uncomfortable back in the 90s and 80s going into a comic book store and purchasing comics surrounded by dudes in sweatpants, you know? So digital distribution of comic book style materials has really actually boosted female readership here in the United States, and we're seeing it also in China. And basically everything I'm talking about, I just want to point out that all of this content is all digital based. It's all platform based. And it's all kind of based around smart devices. And the reason why is because China did not grow up like we did with home computers. You know, here in the United States, people had a home computer in the 80s and 90s. As we move in today, almost everyone has a laptop. And that's kind of your base of getting onto the internet. You know, but over in China, people did not have a disposable income to be able to afford a home computer. So net cafes were a big part of the industry. And gaming was all about net cafes. It was all computer-based. But basically, since the iPhone came out, that was around the time when Chinese people actually started to have a disposable income. And then when what's the tablet? The Apple's tablet. iPad, thank you. The iPad. So whenever the iPad came out, you actually saw basically an entire generation, millennials, and now Generation Z, who is completely grown up only using a smart device and not using a computer or a laptop. So all of this content is geared towards viewerships on those types of devices. Now, I could actually talk completely about the light novel, about freemium light novels. Kind of a way to think of this is serialized fiction. Back in the 1800s, early 1900s, you would have cheap pulp magazines that would basically serialize a story, so there would be a chapter every week, and that would basically be a way for people to come back and read that chapter. And this is actually quite common in China. So you have basically the largest platform. I'll get back to this user-generated content. But the largest platform is Tencent Literature. Tencent, again. Tencent was the first company to be, the first non-American company to be valued at over $500 billion, more than $500 billion. And earlier this year, it was the 5th largest company in the world. They've lost some value recently. And of course, it is government censorship interference that made them lose about $140 billion in value over just a couple of weeks. And it all kind of gears over towards the gaming industry. But user-generated content and Tencent literature. Tencent literature is basically the company that controls this entire market. And if you want to think of it like as Amazon Kindle or Wattpad, where basically people can upload their stories or their novels for free and sell it to people, well, China has this same model, but there's a slight twist to it. So you can upload your stories, your novels, onto the Tencent literature platform, and people can read it. But if you want to make money, it's quite different than the Amazon model. The Amazon model is you can charge people to purchase your novel, and Amazon just keeps a large chunk of it, and then you get part of that money. Well, in China, with Tencent literature, the model is based around all the content that you put up is completely free. Now, if you want to charge for your content, you become a VIP member of Tencent literature, and you sign a contract with Tencent. And basically what this means is Tencent owns the copyright of your product, of your written stories. And the best way to actually profit off of this type of content is to actually serialize it. So you have a chapter every day or a chapter every week, and people make a microtransaction, towards that chapter. Or after the story is completed, that story, you could purchase the story per chapter, or you could purchase the story as a whole. But Tencent keeps the majority of the profits, and Tencent controls the copyright. So if your story takes off, your characters, your IP takes off, and there are companies who are wanting to actually adapt it into other platforms, whether it be games, anime series, live action movies, the company who controls all the negotiation and sales of this is Tencent literature. And I could actually do just a whole panel. I could do a whole lecture specifically on Tencent literature because of the complications, and the structure of all of this IP going upstream and downstream is basically controlled by Tencent, and it's controlled by Tencent and all of its different subsidiaries, going from basically like comic book apps up to Chinese anime. Oh, well, one of the most successful ones back here is the Fox Spirit Matchmaker. Fox Spirit Matchmaker was a Tencent comic that became so successful. It's probably one of the most successful comic books in China. It's one of the only ones that they actually will specifically mention by name in English. It's quite rare to have any Chinese comic book content ever referred to specifically by its name when you're reading English articles about this market. And Fox Spirit Matchmaker is one of those. And it was so successful that one of Tencent's animation divisions created a Chinese anime for it. Now, I'm not sure if that anime was released on Tencent's anime platform or if they released it on Bilibili, which is not owned by Tencent, but Tencent has enough of a control. They own a percentage of the company through investment that there's a lot of interplay. And this is why Tencent actually was the big supporter of Bilibili's listing on NASDAQ. And this is why they supported Kuaishou, and Kuaishou bought the biggest competition of Bilibili, Akfun. It's all about this connected ecosystem that Tencent controls. And there's other players in this market, but just basically you can just refer to Tencent, and you don't have to actually talk about any of the other players. And it's just because it is so powerful, and its reach is so specific in AGCN, in this Chinese anime, Manhua Comics, games, and the Freemium Light Novel industries and market. Oh, and this one here, this is actually another very popular Qingyunian. Not really sure, I can't remember what it means in English, but this is another popular serialized story that was adapted into an anime. The animation of that is terrible. I don't recommend trying to find it. It is really, really, really shitty. But recently it was adapted into a live action series that has been proven incredibly successful for Tencent. And I just like this. I just like the image. So that's why I decided to pick it. But briefly, I referred to, in like the first slide, what is 2D culture? 2D culture is, like I said, just a reference to anything that is like a 2D type of two-dimensional type of animation, whether it be anime or comic book material. But Pan Entertainment is one of those rebranding that China tried to do, and basically it's branded IP. And in reality, there's really nothing that sets Pan Entertainment apart from branded IP. Like 2D culture and this kind of idea there, ACGN, there is this signification, there is this Chinese cultural twist, and this Chinese soft power that the culture and the government has kind of pushed onto it. And they tried to do the same thing with Pan Entertainment, but basically there's no way to take branded IP and kind of give it a Chinese twist. Branded IP is basically Disney. So you have the Disney model, you have Mickey Mouse, you have Bambi. So basically it's products like this, or Star Wars. This is why Disney bought Star Wars, Pixar, Marvel, is because it fits all into their Disney model of branded IP. And it's basically intellectual property, characters. The Batmobile is considered to be an IP. You can actually make VR rides, or you can actually make a roller coaster ride or commercials that are based around the Batmobile, and you don't have to have Batman. And it's because it's an IP itself. Because when people see the Batmobile, they're going to associate the Batmobile with Batman, even if Batman's not actually present in any of these cross-platform licensing. And so this is what it is. And kind of a good example, this is actually the promotional poster. Chinese movies are actually getting to be really cool with posters. It's I think there's more creative and artistic quality to Chinese movie posters than the movies themselves. And this is for Black Panther, which actually made over $100 million at the box office. And this poster is red like this. It's designed specifically because Black Panther came out around the time of the Chinese New Year. The Chinese New Year follows the lunar calendar, the moon calendar, so it actually varies every year. It typically lands in February. And the Chinese New Year, or the Spring Festival, is so big that basically you could consider it to be Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and the 4th of July all wrapped into one. Some people even take off an entire month for the Chinese New Year, and it is allowed. It's typically a 10-day holiday. So this period going up to the Chinese New Year and right afterwards, as foreigners, we basically have to realize we're not going to do any business. And if you're in China, you ever see pictures of like millions of people, like tens of thousands of people, like getting onto a train or in one place, it's usually during the time. It's that mass exodus outside of Beijing, from Beijing to all of these people's hometowns, because it's a big deal to go visit your family. And if you don't, you're a bad child. But I really like this, the Black Panther. The Marvel Cinematic Universe itself, Marvel is a brand. Spider-Man is a brand. This would all be considered to be Pan Entertainment. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is the largest franchise in China. In China, it's actually made $1.2 billion at the box office since Iron Man. Every single Marvel movie has been released in China, and a lot of them are released in what's referred to as day and date. That means it's released on the exact same day in China that it is here in the United States, which means because of time zone magic, people in China get to see the Marvel movie before we do, by almost a day. But I just like this. And the interesting thing is that Black Panther actually did over $100 million, but there was a lot on the Chinese Twitter, Douban, there was a lot of very, very odd and very strange and very Chinese racist comments. And the racist comments were that the screen was so dark that they couldn't see the actors playing on them. And this was kind of a big deal. And it was right after the Chinese New Year big gala special that they put on TV, and there was a Chinese person in blackface playing an African as well. So that's it's a whole bag unto itself. But the future of ACGN, basically, the future is digital platforms. Bilibili, if you guys got a Crunchyroll membership, or if you ever been on Crunchyroll, basically Bilibili is very similar. It's like a Chinese Crunchyroll. And what that means is that there's a big social social aspect to it, social media aspect to it. And Bilibili actually has their own fan convention, just like the Crunchyroll Expo every year. And it was launched in 2013. 8,000 people attended. Last year, over 100,000 people attended the Bilibili macro link. So platforms is actually the future, and it's going to continue to be. But when you're looking at like feature films, there's actually a lot more experimental animation going on. Because the animation that is being profitable is Chinese anime and so forth, that is on Chinese platforms. But going to feature length, you have these kind of children's cartoons that are basically TV series that are getting their feature film equivalent. And you have films like, now you really can't see very well, but Have a Nice Day. Have a Nice Day is actually based around the Chinese triads, the Chinese mafia, and it was incredibly strange that this violent, very dark movie actually got a Chinese theatrical release, because if this was live action, it would not have. It would have been censored and it would have been banned from being distributed on Chinese streaming platforms or movie theaters. But because it's animation, there's a little bit of a leeway that's kind of going on. And another one, which I'm really excited, I'm waiting until we can get it here in the United States, it's Da Hufa. Da Hufa, he's basically a warrior searching for the lost prince, and he encounters this peanut village. So there's like these peanut people. And the reason why they made them peanut people is because he takes his sword, which is here, it's kind of difficult to see, and he basically hits them on the heads, and their heads explode. It was quite an interesting animation, and a lot of people were really surprised that this also was released in the Chinese movie theaters. In the future, we're looking at censorship. So there is a big concern that the Chinese government, just like they do with feature films at the box office or TV shows, that they are basically going to take that powerful hand and grip it around Chinese anime. Because there's more and more mature content like Awakening and Zombie Brother. Basically, these are two post-apocalyptic Chinese comics that have been transformed into anime series. And the interesting thing is that Awakening was so successful that the first season was pulled. So in China, you cannot legally watch the first season, but you can watch the second season. And 800 million views of the first season over just the few weeks that it was actually up. So it was one of the most successful Chinese animes on the digital platforms. And when the second season came, it went from being a zombie apocalypse to the zombies were basically like AI Terminators. So this is kind of another one of those things. The Chinese are very weird about ghosts, demons, about kind of these kind of horror elements, but robots are cool. Robots are okay. So you have this very mature kind of Walking Dead anime that basically was incredibly popular, but you can't have zombies anymore. You got to make them robots. And the interesting thing about Zombie Brothers, one of Tencent Comics, Tencent again, one of its most successful comic book properties. This is that freemium light novel type of model I was talking about. So Zombie Brothers was actually a amateur comic book that was created and put up on Tencent Comics. It's that user-generated content that is basically what propels Tencent literature and propels all of their IP and stories that they're looking to grab and move upstream and downstream through all their different entertainment subsidiaries. And this is probably the most successful on an international scale because it was an amateur comic book that, just like One Punch Man, it was an amateur comic book that was then taken by Tencent and reissued and brought in with new artists. The stories were polished up a little bit, and it was put out as a very, very classy, polished comic book series on Tencent Comics. I believe there's an anime series as well for it, but the interesting thing why I put this here and I put Hollywood is because Chinese movies, Chinese TV series, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was almost 20 years ago when it came out. And we haven't really had a Chinese movie. And Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon really isn't a Chinese movie. The director's from Taiwan, educated in the United States, and one of the co-writers was a white American guy. So Chinese content really doesn't make money. It doesn't travel outside of China. But we're looking at the AGCN market, and it just might. And one thing is Zombie Brothers is going to be Channing Tatum's first movie that he's going to be producing. So Channing Tatum actually bought the rights to Zombie Brothers. Now, whether Channing Tatum is actually going to be starring in the film or if he's just going to be producing through his production company is up in the air. But we're actually seeing ACGN content actually coming over here and being made by Hollywood. So there are definitely some possibilities for ACGN actually being exported outside of the United States. That's kind of an overview. I'm sorry, I didn't. This is really kind of more of like a lecture, and I'm talking more about the business aspect of it. I wasn't able to get with A2A and kind of hammer down to like what maybe the theme of the convention was to try to be more specific. Like I will be the Bit and Bill Film Festival. We're actually looking at bringing in the head of content for Elation. So Elation is the company that owns Verve and Crunchyroll. So the head of content for Crunchyroll, we're looking to bring her in. We've actually got an agent with the William Morris agency, the big Hollywood agency, who opened up their Beijing office, and a gaming expert over in China. We're going to be looking to bring them in for the Beijing Film Festival to do that panel. And it's going to be much more of a specific. It's not going to be just me standing up here talking and giving an overview. But I appreciate you guys coming in. You can follow me on LinkedIn. It's kind of hard to see, but basically I write and I do commentary. I write extensive articles on this subject. So if you guys are ever interested in wanting to learn more specifically about different aspects, you can follow me on LinkedIn and you can see some of the articles. And if you guys have any questions, you're more than free to ask now, yes, or stick around. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my heard news reports of China introducing cultural points that's not everything.
Mm-hmm.
Are they interested in going out to what media you're consuming on your phone? Like, okay, you consume media minus 1 point. You did this minus that.
Oh, you mean like a
like real life psychopaths.
Okay, so like a rating system.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
They have a rating system. Like you're signed on. Even the police feel like, oh, you visited this place, you did this. That's enough. And you can rebrand it like.
Yeah, I think the thing is that this type of content, like Chinese anime, it's so important for the Chinese government because of this soft power possibility. That they basically they don't want the content makers to be making all this violence, profanity and sex, or things like zombies.
Chinese value.
So they want basically it appears within Chinese anime and comic books that you are going to have like this kind of fringe material. They're going to be able to do more things in these mediums than they would like live action. But having like this type of system, they actually do have it in China, but it's not geared towards any of the entertainment areas. It's actually it's geared towards Chinese tourists because Chinese tourists are terrible. I guess over in the Louvre, the French Museum, the Louvre, they have a sign in Chinese. It's only in Chinese, like don't pee or poop in the fountain, because I guess they had Chinese people pee or poop in the fountain. I hope they were children. But you never really know. But they've had so many instances of this. There's been several instances of like flight delays where the planes are on the tarmac, and then just some Chinese just gets up and they open up the emergency door because they want to leave. They want to just maybe go get the next flight. So they have implemented this kind of like society credit. It's kind of like your credit score for buying a car. They have this for basically bad behavior, but really it's more geared towards people. It was created for people traveling abroad and doing bad things and making China look bad, in like international news.
Lose face.
Yeah, to lose face. Yeah, that is a very important aspect of it.
Oh no,
yeah.
I have Chinese.
Yeah.
So one of my brothers married to
Okay.
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong. Oh, see, that's
totally different.
totally different. Yeah.
They're very, it's like I'm on way out on for I know almost
Yeah.
none of them. I found that out about Chinese families. They're very like insular.
Yeah.
Like, they're like very tight.
Yeah, and with the one-child policy, people since the '80s, people have been 2 generations been growing up without any brothers and sisters. So your cousin or your mom's close friend's child basically becomes your brother. So you actually treat this person who's not even a family member, but it's like your mom's best friend's child as like your little brother, or little sister, or older brother, or sister kind of thing.
Oh no, I it's like I've never even met them.
Yeah. Okay.
I've never met them because I'm like they live off either they're in Hong Kong or God knows where else in Asia.
Yeah.
And then Vancouver.
Yeah. Vancouver's that's
Expensive.
There was a streaming reality show, kind of like the Kardashians, but it was all about like first generation rich kids. So it's basically about like their parents grew up poor, or just normal people, or they grew up like as peasants, and now they're super rich because of the growth of the Chinese economy. And you have these they call them Dai'arfu. Dai'arfu is very negative in connotation, and it basically refers to kids of incredibly wealthy families who are first generation money. And yeah, like there's a whole like TV series, and I think they're trying to adapt it into a movie. Crazy Rich Asians,
I watched that and
Yeah.
I was going like, who are these people? And I'm like, they're in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, no, my brother's go like, you go any place in Vancouver, you go to the Staples or a grocery store, it's like, Staples, Chinese characters for Staples, Chinese characters for everything.
Oh wow.
Chinese characters all over.
Yeah.
You probably learn Chinese even if you don't want to. And it's like, it's everywhere. But, you have like these nouveau rich kids go by in central Vancouver, super in brand new everything. And I'm like, going like, they know nothing. They're totally.
There was I was still living in Beijing, and there was a story of these nouveau rich kids, and it's a son, and he was the son of a very high-ranking government official, and he was driving like a Ferrari or Lamborghini or whatever. He was driving it down like the main road that goes in front of the Forbidden City in Tiananmen Square. So it's a big road that goes from the east west, goes across the entire town, and he was driving incredibly fast. They had a wreck, and then when the police came, him and 2 other girls were completely naked, just completely naked, driving around crazy, fast in this Lamborghini. And I think that it was an incredibly serious accident where maybe it affected other people. And this party member kind of disappeared, because he had to take the blame for his insular side.
Oh,
yeah. But there's a lot of really weird things that go on there.
Just going like, I mean, I've heard of bad Americans and stuff.
Oh yeah, no, Americans are terrible.
Entitled Americans.
We're the worst. I've gotten on to Americans like in China, kind of the way they treat people. But the Chinese, like they're just it's a whole different bag.
You're well behaved at home.
Yeah.
Sometimes not so at home.
Yeah.
And I think that probably goes for all countries. Like, when you go abroad, some people are just stupid.
You're either better, you're more controlled, or you're more out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is something that's quite common. But all right, yes.
You see them actually decide, okay, we're going to make, anime or whatever, directed at the American market. Original material, we're going to make money, let's make it, let's put something out like that, specifically, not just just dub something and send it over.
Yeah, actually, there's been a lot of live action attempts. There's been a lot of film funds that have kind of come and gone. Over the last few years. 2016, there was all these different film deals and film funds, talks of actually Paramount Studios being bought by Wanda, which is one of the biggest movie theater chains. It is the biggest movie theater chain in the world. but it will not be. They're going to be selling some of their assets. That's a whole other thing. But it's basically failed, because they always try to come at it from a Chinese business point of view and basically a Chinese way of creating content. Now with anime and so forth, I don't think at this time there really is like a market here in the United States. Like people are not even really aware that this market exists. In the future, there probably will be some Chinese who try to create, and most likely they'll be trying to create something more along the lines of like a Japanese anime rather than like a Chinese anime. So basically, they probably will try to create a Japanese anime or something that people, when they buy it or watch it, will just assume it comes out of Japan rather than coming out of China. So that probably will be an approach that we will start to see in them trying to sell their product outside of China. And most likely will be that they'll try to make it look like it's not Chinese, in style and in structure.
Is there like underground comics?
Oh yeah,
Anything over there?
There is. It was really surprising. This it's really hard to see, but this Have a Nice Day. This Have a Nice Day is a feature-length animated movie, very experimental. One guy did it. The director did the animation completely himself. So the animation is very simple in most ways. But this guy was actually creating this animation more as an experimental animation. He was going to try to get out in the film festival market, and it is more underground. And people were really surprised that it was allowed to be released.
Yeah.
And it was allowed to be released because he got it into some film festivals abroad, and there was such a positive reception to, wow, China's actually making some really interesting, almost high art animation. So they did a limited release in China. They put it onto one of their platforms.
I mean, is there like people putting out content, underground that's like stuff you can't get because of the government,
The government controls all the platforms. There's really not apps or platforms out there that last very long that the government does not approve of. There's an entire multi-story building near the Forbidden City in Tiananmen Square, and it's just your bland, probably 15-story government-looking building. Inside that building, all of the employees are watching the internet. They have, not only do they probably have hundreds of thousands, they probably have millions of employees in China. And the thing is like with Tencent Comics, with NetEase, all of these, all these other major players, they also have complete divisions of employees, and their jobs as employees is just to monitor content. Because if somebody posts something like this kind of underground type of material,
Chinese Fury or like that.
Yeah, no. So if they post it onto Tencent and it becomes popular, the government, like Bilibili, the biggest platform, they will actually shut down the entire platform. So that platform will just disappear for a few days, and they'll lose millions of dollars in revenue. And it's basically the government telling them, you have to make sure this type of content does not get put on. There was actually a comic, like a comic strip, satirical comic strip, and they actually took two kind of war heroes from the Chinese Revolution, and this comic strip, has kind of this animated face, and it's a real big wonky face. And they put this face on these two heroes, and they did a little short kind of flash animation with it, and it did not go over well. They actually got shut down, and they had to go in front of the monument of these heroes and make a public apology on national television. So it's kind of, you would probably find like in Taiwan and Hong Kong this type of material, but in mainland China, it would not be common.
Do you think eventually that even in Hong Kong, all that stuff,
It will go away.
will
It will go away. Hong Kong is the amount of freedom that we associate with Hong Kong, and kind of the Hong Kong that we think of, which was the 80s and 90s, is slowly being deteriorated. mainland China is really coming in to that. And that's a whole other aspect of it, as well. So, yeah, I got the projector working. She walked away. Anything else?
They have like Chinese banks, like Chinese investment banks invest in other industries. Do they have like governments that you will give money to this industry?
Not yet. And I think it's just because the industry is growing so fast, and it's actually not the banks. The banks themselves, all banks in China are actually owned by the government, even if they are officially not owned by the government. But a lot of the investors, Tencent, yet again, Tencent is investing into basically all of these companies. And there's another company, Alibaba, the e-commerce platform. Alibaba has been making waves into film and this kind of content. And usually Alibaba will just buy up the company completely. But Tencent strategically invests into all of these different companies, and basically it's connecting. And the reason why Tencent is so successful, so popular, is because of the WeChat app. So this is a social media app. Basically, you think of it as like WhatsApp meets Facebook, all built into one. And you can pay for everything on WeChat. You can do all of your social media, is all done on WeChat. WeChat has over 1 billion users on it. I'm on WeChat, but that's just because it's the easiest way to talk to people in China.
I know, like Iron Man, one of the movies, they had like some like a scientist that would be from China.
Yeah.
It's actually an actress from China or something like that. It's basically put in there for the Chinese market.
So that was kind of a rare thing. That was really before Disney completely controlled the MCU. That was when Paramount was still involved, before Disney just completely bought them out. And there was a American Chinese company called DMG. It was a company founded by an American and 2 Chinese back in the 90s. And DMG invested into Iron Man. I think they actually bought like 30%. They put up 30% of the budget for Iron Man. And this was so that they could have the rights to distribute. So this was Iron Man 2. So basically Iron Man 2 was distributed by a Chinese distributor, kind of as a Chinese movie. It's kind of weird. They were trying to make it as an official co-production, but that didn't work. And the scene she's talking about is a scene that was only seen in China. I thought they would put it on like the deleted scenes on the Blu-ray, but they didn't. So there's this whole scene that lasts less than 2 minutes that basically is Tony Stark getting his arc reactor pulled out. It was being done over in China by a Chinese doctor, which is a famous Chinese actor. And then you have the Chinese actress, which is, she's been, I don't know which one it is, but she's been in some American kind of action films as well. And the Chinese hated it. They actually didn't like it because the Chinese could tell that they're just being pandered to. It's like, hey, look, Iron Man. And I think at the end, Iron Man, in the suit, makes his superhero landing, and all these Chinese kids around him are like, oh, Iron Man. And it was not. And this was all DMG. DMG paid for it. DMG shot it. And DMG is one of those companies that kind of is maybe going away. It's a little mystery about what's going on with DMG.
Do you see more of that, influence where we need to, because we're going to distribute this movie, in China, so we need to add.
Look at the Transformers movies. If you actually are watching some of the Transformers movies, some of the American locations or other locations have Chinese stores, like in Chinese billboards. And these companies, like these clothing stores, are not located outside of China. Or Stanley Tucci. Stanley Tucci has a scene on top of the building in that Transformers 4, it's the one with the dinosaurs. And Stanley Tucci is standing here close up, and he's drinking a little milk box. It's Chinese milk. And this is the thing. So Hollywood thought, okay, we need to add all these elements, but in reality, they backfire because Chinese feel as if, hey, they're like talking down. They're pandering to them.
They just want American everything in that case. Right?
Yeah, so
they feel, it's kind of product placement.
Yeah, it's product placement, but it's just so obvious product placement. It's like, hey, we're going to put this in your face. And they found out that none of these things really actually make the movies more successful. Because they had some of these films with Chinese actors and so forth put in, and it doesn't actually help the box office. Some of the movies actually failed where they thought they would not. Meg, shark movie, it was primarily, it's basically a Chinese film, actually. Because the Warner Brothers affiliate, the Warner Brothers entity that financed it is Flagship Entertainment. It's Warner Brothers co-venture over in China. And the other company that put up the money that actually got the movie made was Gravity Pictures, which is a fully owned Chinese company. So actually, Meg is a little more Chinese than it is American. So it wasn't backed by Hollywood money. But it did very, very well in China. Surprising. It's just kind of like here in the United States. People were really surprised at how successful it was. And the same in China. They thought it would do well. Because Jason Statham, I've argued, Jason Statham is the biggest Hollywood movie star in China. And it's not because he makes a lot of money, but it's because he's reliable. People are like, oh, Jason Statham, I'm going to watch this movie. All right, guys. Appreciate it.